I don't think it's a stretch to say that Nina Einstein is the most hated character in Code Geass, and for good reason. She's racist, unhinged, ugly, and of course we can't forget about what happened to Table-kun. There's a bigger discussion to have about why people hate Nina for certain things but not other characters, but that's a video for another time. Instead, I want to discuss what I think people's biggest gripe with Nina is. Her confusion and not understanding that bombs kill people. And what a coincidence, they just released the Oppenheimer film over a week ago, a film that details the life of a man who went through something similar. To be more accurate, this aspect of her character was clearly inspired by Robert Oppenheimer in both her role of creating the FLEIJA and the aftermath. Heck, her last name is Einstein for God's sake. Although, ironically enough, Einstein didn't actually work on the Manhattan Project, but he did encourage the creation of nuclear weapons. But Einstein suggested the use of nuclear weapons as a deterrent to Germany, who he wrongly believed were close to creating their own nuclear weapons. Much like Nina, Albert was also upset by the use of nuclear weapons. Of course, the circumstances were obviously different, since both Nina and Robert experienced this guilt of creating the weapons of mass destruction, and because the film just came out, I thought it would be appropriate to explain why Nina didn't understand what bombs did until after Suzaku fired the FLEIJA warhead. I will also address the complaint of why Nina wasn't even tried for war crimes following the Zero Requiem. Let's start this off by going over how we got to this point. At the start of Season 2, Nina began working for the In Vogue, a research science team which was based in Dallas, Texas. The goal of the project was to create a nuclear weapon, much like the goal of the Manhattan Project. Although the situations were quite different, Britannia was already the superpower of the world, and they didn't need this weapon to maintain their dominance nor secure peace. They were already decimating the EU and working on a treaty with the Chinese Federation. Schneizel founded the project on less noble goals when compared to the Manhattan Project. As it was revealed in Turn 23, he intended to use them to control the world. It's not clear if that was always his goal or a result of Lelouch becoming Emperor of Britannia. What is clear is that given the global situation, Schneizel probably always had ulterior motives for creating the FLEIJA warhead. But Schneizel isn't a scientist, and that's where Nina comes in. Thanks to a recommendation from Lloyd, Schneizel recruited her for the project. Nina was already working on the project in Season 1, so it makes sense she would continue to do this in Season 2. We learned at the end of Season 1 that her main motivations for creating a prototype of the FLEIJA was revenge for Euphemia through the death of Zero. Even then, she didn't realize that everyone else would die alongside him if her prototype worked, herself included. When discussing this with Schneizel later on in R2, he validates her actions by saying she did all of this for Euphemia. He believes in her and therefore believes in Nina, who feels the same way. This is one of the many times where Schneizel manipulates Nina to create the weapon. Schneizel assures her that creating the FLEIJA is the right way to avenge Euphemia. Keep this in mind because we will come back to it when talking about Nina's redemption. And I always found Schneizel's manipulation reprehensible when you consider that Nina was clearly unhinged during this time. She's not over Euphemia's death and uses that as justification for lashing out against others. Nina clearly needs therapy, not a job on a science team working on a weapon of mass destruction. To be fair, I think most characters in the series should also be seeing a therapist. Anyways, in Turn 15, Nina's hard work would pay off with the first successful test of the FLEIJA warhead. Nina is quite happy with the results and casually states that,
"Now war itself will change, and mankind with it."
Schneizel is also pleased since Damocles is now here. In the next episode, Nina casually asks Suzaku to use the FLEIJA warhead while describing its power. She again mentions Euphemia, which shows that her motivations haven't changed since the end of Season 1. If the Black Knights engage with Britannia, then Suzaku can wipe them out with the FLEIJA warhead. Suzaku agreed to arm himself with the weapon, but only intended to use it as a deterrent. Before Suzaku heads out to the battlefield, Nina tries to use the FLEIJA herself, and thankfully Cecile and Lloyd stop her. Again, it's unfortunate that despite the obvious signs of Nina being unhinged, no one seems to care. Suzaku tells Nina,
"But are you prepared to actually fire the FLEIJA? And more importantly, are you prepared to not fire it?"
there's an important subtext here. Suzaku is a soldier and as a result has seen a lot of death in his life, including many awful massacres, with the SAS being the most recent example. He has an understanding of what the consequences of using a FLEIJA would entail. Nina, by contrast, just doesn't. I mean, how could she? She's been working in a lab that's far away from the battlefield. She only has a theoretical understanding of war and death, and she's only fueled by the rage to kill one person, Zero. And through that rage, she created a weapon that can kill millions. So with all that in mind, she doesn't carefully listen to Suzaku's wise words here. Throughout the battle in Tokyo, Nina continually asks Suzaku to fire the FLEIJA. Suzaku refuses, but assures her that he will stop Zero. I do wish Suzaku had explained in more detail why he can't use the FLEIJA. It might have convinced Nina to stop asking him to use it, but then again, she was so blinded by rage at the time that I doubt it would have worked. Near the end of the battle, Suzaku was moments away from certain death. Colin has him on the ropes and is about to deal the final blow, despite Nina again encouraging Suzaku to fire the FLEIJA weapon and even saying it would save his life. He refuses. He again cites that the threat of the weapon is why it's equipped to his Lancelot, but due to Lelouch's Geass, Suzaku fires the FLEIJA warhead as Schneisel always counted on. This was one of the biggest WTF moments in the entire series. The FLEIJA's explosion was immense, killing potentially over 25 million and wiping out the Tokyo settlement. These poor people were vaporized. As the list of the dead pour in, Nina begins to freak out, unable to comprehend how this happened. Nina had her I am become deaf moment that Robert Oppenheimer had. Now we can answer why Nina did not realize that a bomb could kill people. Is she just an idiot, or is there more going on here? When it came to Robert Oppenheimer, I believe he understood the consequences but felt he had to finish the project because of his duty. He also believed that dropping the first bomb in Japan was justifiable, but not so much with the second one. So Robert obviously understood what bombs do, but still felt guilty for its use. There's nothing wrong with having guilt for a necessary evil. Nina's situation was different. She wasn't motivated by patriotism or duty. As I said, her main motivation was to avenge Yuffie by killing Zero, so creating the FLEIJA was her best chance to do this. And thanks to people like Schneisel, she never considered the consequences of her actions. Nina even told Lloyd it was just numbers to her. This makes sense since she always talked about the FLEIJA so casually, whereas Suzaku didn't. But are the explanations of being blinded by rage or only seeing things as numbers the only thing going on here? Sort of. Let me offer my own belief as to what I think happened with a simple analogy. Person A has never fired a gun before in their life. This person decides to change that by attending classes at a firing range. Eventually, this person becomes quite proficient with a firearm. In fact, they become so skilled that they get a concealed carry license. One day, while concealing their weapon, this person runs into thugs in an alley, and the thugs threaten this person's life, forcing them to open fire and kill them. After taking their lives, the person is in shock and confused, having a hard time coming to terms with what just happened. But the question is why? This person knows that guns are made to harm or kill other living things. The person is trained with the weapon, so obviously they learned everything about gun use. So why would it bother them? Because there's a difference between theoretical and actual, between knowledge and experience. A person can obtain knowledge on anything, but without putting that knowledge into use and getting experience, they will never fully understand it. That's why someone like Nina can casually state what her bomb does and only freak out later after seeing the destruction it caused. This is again why I made a distinction earlier between Suzaku and Nina's attitudes when it came to the FLEIJA warhead. One person has experienced death on the battlefield while the other hasn't. It was only after seeing its devastation firsthand did Nina understand what she just did. Before then, she only saw it as a project, a means to kill one person, not millions. It could have even been difficult for Nina to even comprehend the deaths of millions of people as a concept, and I wonder if some of these things happened to Robert himself. Following the firing of the FLEIJA warhead, Nina was devastated and found herself at a crossroad. She first goes to Lloyd for advice, but she wasn't satisfied with his answers. Later on, we see that Nina goes to Ground Zero at the same time as Suzaku. This was the beginning of Turn 20, and it's one of my favorite parts in the entire series. Suzaku recounts his entire journey up to this point, which included the firing of the FLEIJA warhead. Nina, like I said, is present here, which leads to their discussion on the FLEIJA. Both characters from that moment will go into two opposite directions. Suzaku acknowledges he can no longer hold on to his moral code and becomes a killer. He believes that using the FLEIJA was his deed to propel him to become the Knight of One and work with Schneizel. Nina realizes her actions were wrong and decides to no longer work with Schneizel. It's an underrated scene that really shows how much Nina and Suzaku have changed and grown throughout the entirety of Code Geass, which even their biggest detractors cannot deny. We see Nina later on at Ashford Academy, where she's apparently in hiding. She claims,
When I built the FLEIJA, I never in my wildest dreams thought all those countries would target me. They're relentless.
This is an interesting subplot that unfortunately doesn't go anywhere. I assume she means they were targeting her to help create FLEIJA warheads for them. For starters, how did anyone know that Nina worked on the FLEIJA warhead? Was that public knowledge? Did people know after turn 18 that Britannia had a FLEIJA warhead? I guess since the Black Knights were part of the UFN, they must have told others. They never explored this subplot, which was a damn shame. I assume it only existed in the story to somewhat parallel Robert's journey, where others wanted the bomb after the US created it. Anyways, following Lucia's arrival at Ashford to negotiate with the UFN, Nina helps Rivals out of a jam, which leads to Lloyd saving them from a sticky situation. The whole thing was actually Lucia's plan to get Nina to work for him, and it went perfectly. Following Schneizel using the FLEIJA on Pendragon without the limiter, Nina works with Lloyd and Cecile on a countermeasure for this weapon. It's important to recognize that without this countermeasure, the Zero Requiem would have never succeeded. Before Luce heads out to use the countermeasure with Suzaku, he has a final conversation with Nina. The conversation is a bit cryptic, but here's my interpretation of it. Nina realized that Yuffie wouldn't have approved of her actions. Everything Schneizel told her was a lie. In reality, Lelouch actually understood Yuffie's true wish. That's why Nina was so devoted to helping him despite killing Euphemia. Lelouch wants to bring peace to the world through freedom, where Schneizel was going to accomplish the same thing through fear and control. Nina also mentioned that she separated her feelings from Lelouch killing Yuffie to helping him here. I believe that by helping Lelouch, she could redeem herself for creating the FLEIJAs and ultimately wiping their existence from the world. I don't know if, just like Robert, Nina contemplated if the existence of weapons of mass destruction should exist in the world, but her actions show that when presented with this dilemma, she chose to remove them from existence. That must have been the answers she was looking for. Unless, of course, she was looking for an existential answer, then in that case, I have no idea what she meant. Considering what Euphemia meant to her, by working with Zero, it showed excellent character growth. I would argue Nina probably has one of the best character arcs in the entire series. Now, following the Zero Requiem, Nina didn't face any legal consequences for the FLEIJA warhead. She wasn't tried for war crimes and instead is shown attending Valletta and Ogi's wedding. This led to many speculating why this was the case, and now we can answer the question, should Nina have been tried for war crimes? I understand the argument, but there are two important considerations here. Number one, despite what some believe, including the channel No Operator, Nina isn't the sole creator of the FLEIJA warhead. Remember, she was part of a team that was funded by Schneizel. Without him, there's no FLEIJA. Yet no one brings up that Schneizel wasn't tried for war crimes. He funded and authorized the use of FLEIJAs. Schneizel was going to subjugate the whole world with them. And number two, what about Nunnally? She actively used them. Nina only created the FLEIJA warhead. So the question becomes, who's more responsible? The one who creates the weapon or the one who uses the weapon? I guess you could pin the blame on both. The creator of a weapon knows that it exists to kill others, but only created it because someone will use it. A person can only use a weapon if it exists, but a weapon wouldn't exist if a person wouldn't use it. It's an interesting paradox. Code Geass takes an interesting route here and decides that no one is to be tried for war crimes, including Schneizel or Nina. I'm not sure how that worked out. With Schneizel, maybe had to do with Lucius Geass' command? Maybe Schneizel took blame for everything. I wish they explored this further in the anime. What I can say for sure is that Nina is not the sole person that should be taking blame for the FLEIJA warhead. There were many things going on here at the time, and I wish that people took that in consideration when discussing this topic. And despite her excellent redemption story, people will still always think of Table Code when talking about her, which is unfortunate. Nina had too many things working against her at that that point, so it's understandable why everyone just dunks on her for this as well. Let me know your thoughts on Nina's similar journey as Robert's in creating the bomb. Have I convinced you that maybe Nina's response made sense, or do you still think she was an idiot? If you enjoyed the video, please like and share it, and don't forget to subscribe for more awesome Code Geass content.